Now, this week we've talked about Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. Those are the Olivet Discourse accounts. We talked about Luke 17 and 18. Fascinating stuff. And then I just couldn't move on from the Gospels without making a little mention of Mark 13. I go into this in a little bit more detail in the notes. I'm not going to take the time to fully unpack all of these parables now, but I just want to give you an overview so that you'll see it. I want you to recognize it because Jesus shares several parables about the kingdom of heaven, and some of which he specifically indicates they come to fulfillment at the end of the age. He mentions the end of the age in several of these parables, especially the parable of the weeds and the parable of the net. They describe how the faithful and wicked will endure the discipline of the tribulation together, but be separated afterwards when Jesus returns. Again, explanations and cross-references and all kinds of detail for this are available in the notes. And just for the sake of time, I'm just going to give you a quick overview and a scroll through of it here. Now, interestingly, I love the parable of the sower. There's nothing in the parable of the sower to suggest that it's limited or specific to the end of the age, except for that many of the descriptions of the end of the age and God's intention for the end of the age is obviously to cultivate the soil of the nations for the greatest harvest possible. Many of the promises that we've covered in the Old Testament about how God orchestrates the end of the age so that then the greatest harvest can be reaped. So then the nations will know, so that his arm will be seen by all the nations, so that his glory will be manifest, so that as many of them as possible will accept and embrace the return of the Messiah and turn to repentance and join the Lord and his glorious reign in the Messianic age. This is throughout the Old Testament descriptions of the end of the age. And so the parable of the sower, even though Jesus is explaining it almost on an individual by individual basis, it can also be thought of as God's intention to cultivate the soil of the nations at the end of the age. And I do believe we're meant to interpret it with that complementary interpretation because of the way that other parables in this chapter are shared in the same way. Many of you have heard the parable of the sower before. I'm not going to talk all the way through it, other than what I mentioned just now. And I've got cross-references for that interpretation in the notes. Things like Isaiah 45, which is just this appeal to the Gentiles. Please, Gentiles, turn and be saved, all the ends of the earth. For I am God and there is no other. By myself I have sworn, my mouth has gone out, a word that shall not return. To me every knee will bow, and every tongue will swear allegiance. And so even as that seed is being sown through the Great Commission and the things that we talked about, how persecution will arise and the gospel will be proclaimed to all nations, God's hope in his heart is that as many as possible will be this good soil. Those who hear the word, they understand it, and indeed it bears fruit in their lives and in their nation. And so that context is very dear to the Great Commission and is something that we need to be aware of. So it's fitting that we would discuss it in this week alongside the other chapters that we've been looking at today. It's just a very dear thing to God's heart, and it should be dear to us as well. Then we get to the parable of the weeds. Now, this one very specifically does talk about the end of the age. For the parable of the weeds, Jesus says he put together a parable for. Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while his men were sleeping, the enemy came and sowed weeds among them, among the wheat, and then he went away. And when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also among the grain. Then the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Now just pause there, because notice how the faithful servants accuse the master of using bad seed in the field. And that's just so funny, because how often do we complain or blame God for the poor behavior of certain people among our communities, among our churches, or whatever? Yeah, surely there are some weeds in the mix for sure. And the master says, the enemy has done this. So the servant said to him, well, then do you want us to go out and gather all of them up? But he says, no, lest in the gathering of the weeds, you uproot actual wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at the harvest time, I will tell the reapers, go gather the weeds and bind them into bundles to be burned, and gather the wheat into my barn. Now, at this point, you think, interesting. But Jesus actually provides an interpretation for this. A little bit further down, let's look at his interpretation. He gives them the meaning of the parable. He says, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man, and the field is the world, and the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. The elect, you could say. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, the offspring of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, or the people of the prince who is to come, you could say. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are gathered to be burned with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom, all causes of sin and lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. Now, at the end of the age, Jesus dispatches angels that have various tasks. It's not just angels doing one thing. There's many groups of angels doing many things. Part of it is to gather the wicked. Part of it is to gather the righteous. And how that unfolds in more detail, we actually look at in other passages. This is just a parable. So this is not necessarily an exact detailed account of how everything plays out, as well as it is in other chapters where Jesus really does just in plain English without parables, just go boom, 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 like Matthew 24, or like we'll look at later in other New Testament passages. But there are a lot of Old Testament references for the Lord sending out angels at the end of the age that are enacting his wrath on the wicked. And many of those cross-references are for you in the notes. And there are also references in the Old Testament about how the Lord will purify the remaining Jewish survivors. So there is truly no sin or sinner left among them. As we enter the Messianic age, there's no sin or sinner in the land of Israel in the Messianic age. That is an Old Testament expectation that's well substantiated, and I have that for you in the notes. And so, very truly, the Messianic age will have a nation that is purified from all sin. And there will be those who are, of course, either raptured or resurrected, those who have been the righteous, who have endured the tribulation, who will shine like the sun. And there have been cross-references for that as well. It may very well be what Jesus describes at the coming of the Son of Man, when the angels gather the elect up into the sky to meet their Messiah and be, again, what's considered the rapture. A fascinating little parable about that. Again, remembering that it is a parable and should be treated with all of the symbolism and all of that it intends. But that's not the only one we're going to look at. We're also going to look at the parable of the net, just briefly. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. Again, it's good fish and bad fish. And when it was full, meaning at the fullness of time, men drew it ashore and sat down and sorted the good into containers and threw away the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. Again, just a parable, but Matthew 25 talks a bit about this. But all of that to say, similar to the parable of the weeds, the parable of the net describes the good and bad fish experiencing the end of the age together and then being separated or distinguished at the end when Jesus returns. This parable does not specifically outline or describe a rapture, so it may find its greatest relevance in the experience in the Jewish survivors who are enduring the discipline of the tribulation together and being separated when Jesus is revealed. And there are many cross-references for that I've included in the notes for you as well. And Matthew 13 goes on a bit more, but that's the end of what is relevant to the end of the age, so that's where I'm going to conclude this chapter. Again, there's a little bit more detail for you in the notes, but that's just a quick overview, and that's going to do it for this week. Thank you guys so much for watching.